There are few things more terrifying than the sudden realization that your own body has become your prison. To be trapped inside a cage of aching joints and failing muscles is a unique and terrible kind of hell. But I am here today to tell you that I learned there is one thing worse. When the person holding the key to that cage, the person you depend on for your food, your medicine, your very survival, is also your jailer. My brother Michael was supposed to be my caregiver, my protector. Instead, he became my tormentor. I will never forget the night, early in my illness, when the pain was a roaring fire in my bones and I was weeping for relief. I begged him to give me my prescribed medication. He stood over my bed, looking down at me with an expression of cold, weary impatience and said, "You're a burden, Sarah. You know that, right? A sad, pathetic burden, but at least you're a rich one." In that moment, he thought he held all the power. He had no idea that for a weaver, even one with crippled hands, the threads of justice are long and patient. He never knew that with every act of cruelty, he was simply handing me the raw material I would need to weave one last intricate and inescapable thing, his downfall. Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to my studio. My name is Sarah, and I am 76 years old. I am so glad to have your company. This room is my sanctuary, a place where I can still create beauty, even if the process is a bit slower than it used to be. As you can see, I am surrounded by the tools of my life's great passion, the art of weaving. The magnificent loom that dominates the room was custom built for me years ago, a beautiful machine of polished maple and steel. Though I can no longer work its pedals with my feet, it has been adapted with hand controls that allow me to continue my work. The shelves are overflowing with cones of silk, merino wool, and linen in every color of the rainbow. Weaving is my meditation. It is a process of taking hundreds of individual fragile threads and, by interlacing them with patience and intention, creating a fabric that is strong, beautiful, and whole. It is a powerful metaphor for a life, I think. We are all just a collection of threads, some bright, some dark, and the pattern we create is the story of who we are. I am so grateful to you for being here, for allowing me to share one of the darker, more tangled threads of my own life's fabric. It gives me strength to know you are listening. Please take a moment to tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. And I have a question for you that has taken me a long time to answer for myself. When you are in a position of complete vulnerability, how do you hold on to your own inner strength? Where do you find it when it feels like everything else has been taken away? Your insights are a great comfort. And if my story resonates with you, I would be so honored if you would give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps to strengthen the fabric of this community we are weaving together. My story does not begin with illness and betrayal. It begins with color, texture, and success. For 30 years, I was a celebrated textile artist. My tapestries, known for their intricate patterns and bold use of color, hung in corporate lobbies, private collections, and even a few prestigious museums. I had a life I had built with my own two hands, a life of creative fulfillment and financial independence. My marriage to my late husband, Ben, was a true partnership, a warm and loving bond that ended far too soon when he lost a battle with cancer. His loss left a gaping hole in my life, but the world we had built, our beautiful home, and my thriving career was a testament to our shared dreams. My relationship with my younger brother, Michael, was, and had always been, more complicated. Michael was the charming, lovable screw-up of our family. He was the handsome, fast-talking boy who could charm anyone and hold on to nothing, not a job, not a relationship, not a responsibility. I had spent most of my adult life acting as his safety net. I was the responsible, successful older sister, and he was the perennial project. I had bailed him out of bad debts, co-signed on apartments he couldn't afford, and listened to his endless, grandiose schemes that never quite materialized. I loved him, of course. He was my brother. But my love was tinged with a weary, maternal exasperation. I saw his flaws, his weakness of character, but I never, in my wildest nightmares, imagined it could curdle into true malice. I saw him as a harmless, overgrown child. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The illness arrived like a thief in the night just a few years after Ben's passing. I was 48 years old at the peak of my career when I began to feel the first whispers of it. A strange stiffness in my hands in the morning, a deep, aching pain in my joints that I first dismissed as the result of long hours at the loom, but the whispers grew into a roar. The diagnosis was a brutal one, a severe and aggressive form of rheumatoid arthritis. It was a relentless, insidious disease that declared war on my own body, turning my immune system against my joints. Within 2 years, my world had crumbled. The hands that had once moved with such speed and precision across the threads of my loom became gnarled, swollen claws of pain. The simple act of walking became a monumental effort. My life of independence, of creation, was over. I was forced to retire. I was a weaver who could no longer weave. I was a prisoner in a body that had become a landscape of agony. At first, Michael stepped in like a hero. He was the one who moved into my guest room to help me out. He was full of promise, as his voice dripping with a newfound solemn sense of duty. "Don't you worry about a thing, Sarah," he said, his expression a perfect performance of loving concern. "You've taken care of me my whole life, now it's my turn to take care of you." The relief I felt was so immense it was like a flood. I was terrified, in constant pain, and utterly alone. I saw his offer not as a burden, but as a blessing. I was so grateful, so desperate for help, that I ignored the small, nagging warning bells in the back of my mind. I willingly, gratefully, handed him the keys to my kingdom. I gave him access to my bank accounts to manage my bills. I gave him control over my medication schedule. I gave him my trust. The shift was subtle at first. The loving, concerned caregiver was a role he played well, but the mask would occasionally slip. It started with small acts of neglect, cloaked in forgetfulness. He would forget to pick up a prescription until I was in agonizing pain. He would forget to buy the specific foods my anti-inflammatory diet required. Each time, he would be a whirlwind of effusive apologies. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. My head has been all over the place worrying about you. It won't happen again." But it always did. Then came the financial mistakes. An unexplained ATM withdrawal here, a double-billed utility there. When I would question him, my mind foggy from the constant pain, he would produce a flurry of receipts and confusing explanations. "See, the money for the pharmacy was this much, and then I had to get gas. It's all there, you're just getting confused, sis. The pain medication can do that to you." He was right about that. The powerful opioids I needed to simply function left me in a constant state of drowsy confusion. I was in no condition to argue, to balance a checkbook. It was easier to just trust him. The first truly undeniable act of betrayal, the moment the beautiful thread of brotherly love finally snapped and revealed the ugly, rotten core beneath, happened on a miserable Tuesday night about 6 months into his care. The pain was a living entity, a dragon breathing fire into every joint in my body. My next dose of the powerful liquid pain medication I took was due, and I was counting the seconds. I called out to him from my bed. "Michael, it's time for my medicine, please." He came into my room, his movements slow, his eyes slightly unfocused. I realized with a jolt of alarm that he had been drinking. Yeah, I'm on it," he slurred, fumbling with the bottle of expensive liquid morphine. He poured the dose into the small measuring cup, his hand unsteady. Then, just before he handed it to me, he hesitated. He looked at the cup, then at me, and a strange, ugly expression crossed his face. "You know," he said, his voice a low, resentful drawl, "this stuff costs a fortune. An absolute fortune. You're lucky you can afford it." "I know, Michael," I said, my voice weak, "and Mom, just please. I need it." He continued to stare at the cup, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. "You're a burden, Sarah," he said, the words landing like stones. "A sad, pathetic burden, but at least you're a rich one." He then did something so shocking, so monstrous, that my mind could barely process it. He raised the small cup to his own lips and drank the medication himself, my medication, my only relief from the agony. He drank it down in one gulp. "Ah," he sighed, a look of blissful relief on his face. "There. Now we both feel a little better." He placed the empty cup on my nightstand and walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the darkness with my pain and the shattered, horrifying truth of who my brother had become. I was not his sister. I was not a person he was caring for. I was a resource, I was a walking, breathing bank account, a collection of valuable assets to be plundered, and my pain, my suffering, was just the cost of doing business. I lay there, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down my face, and I understood that I was not just sick. I was a prisoner, and my jailer was the only family I had left in the world. The night my brother drank my medication was the night the last thread of hope I was clinging to finally snapped. The line between caregiver and captor had been crossed, and the distinction was terrifyingly clear. The months that followed were a descent into a deeper, more isolating hell. My brother, Michael, having shed the pretense of compassionate care, now wore his resentment like a comfortable old coat. His neglect became more pronounced, his cruelty more casual. The house, once a vibrant testament to my life's work, began to decay around me, a slow, creeping rot that mirrored the decay in my own spirit. He had discovered the perfect crime. My illness was my prison, and my dependence on him was his alibi. Who would ever question the devoted brother who had given up his life to care for his invalid sister? He had created a perfect, impenetrable cocoon of lies, and I was the helpless creature trapped inside. My world, which had already shrunk to the size of my house, now contracted even further, to the dimensions of my bedroom. Michael began a systematic campaign to sever my every connection to the outside world, to erase any trace of the woman I had once been. It started with my friends. Before, he had made their visits uncomfortable. Now he made them impossible. My oldest and dearest friend, a fellow artist named Clara, had been my most faithful visitor. One afternoon, she arrived for her weekly visit, a bouquet of bright yellow tulips in her hand. Michael met her at the door, his face a mask of grave, sorrowful concern. "Clara, it's so good of you to come," he said, his voice a low, convincing whisper. "But I'm afraid she's not up to it today. The doctor was just here. He says she needs absolute quiet. Any excitement, any stimulation at all could be dangerous for her." Clara, a kind and trusting soul, was devastated. "Oh, of course," she said, her face full of worry. "Please, just tell her I love her and I'll try again next week." I was in my bed, just down the hall, and I heard every word. I wanted to scream, to tell her it was a lie, but I was too weak, too medicated, and too terrified of what he would do after she left. The next week, Michael had a new excuse, and the week after that. Eventually, Clara's visits stopped, replaced by cards and flowers that Michael would sometimes, if he was in a good mood, remember to bring to my room. He did this with every one of my friends, a slow, methodical pruning of my support system until there was no one left. My only human contact was with him. His next conquest was my art. My studio, with its magnificent loom and its shelves of beautiful, colorful yarn, had been my sanctuary, the one room that still felt like me. At first, I would ask him to wheel me in there just to sit, to be surrounded by the tools of my former life. But my presence in that room seemed to enrage him. It was a reminder of the successful, independent woman I had once been, a stark contrast to the resentful, failed man he was. "What's the point, Sarah Poole?" he would say with a cruel sneer. "Lisham, you can't use any of this stuff anymore. It's just collecting dust. It's a waste of space." One day, I came home from a difficult hospital appointment to find the room changed. He had sold my loom. The magnificent custom-built instrument that had been the center of my creative life was gone. In its place, he had put a large, ugly television set. "I got a great price for it," he said cheerfully, as if he had done me a favor. "And look, now you have something to do all day. You can watch your shows." The message was clear. The artist was dead. The invalid remained. He then began to sell off my other treasures piece by piece, my collection of rare textile books, my antique spinning wheel, the cones of expensive silk and merino yarn. They would simply disappear, and when I would ask about them, he would look at me with a look of pitying concern. "Sarah, that spinning wheel has been gone for years. You sold it before you got sick. Your memory is getting so bad. It's the medication, you know." He was not just stealing my possessions, he was stealing my past, making me doubt my own mind, my own history. A question for you, my friends. Have you ever had someone try to rewrite your own memories, to tell you that something you know happened was just in your head? It is a terrifying form of abuse, a way of making you feel like you are losing your grip on reality itself. How do you hold on to your own truth when someone is determined to erase it? His financial control became absolute and shameless. He no longer bothered with the pretense of showing me receipts or explaining his expenses. My money was his money. He bought himself a new, expensive car. He started wearing designer clothes. He would go on weekend trips to resorts, hiring a temporary and often neglectful agency caregiver to look after me while he was gone. He was living a life of luxury funded by my life's work while I was a prisoner in my own bed. He would come home from these trips, tanned and relaxed, and tell me stories of the beautiful places he had seen, the wonderful meals he had eaten. It was a special kind of psychological torture, a way of constantly reminding me of the vibrant, active world I had lost, a world he was now enjoying on my dime. The over-medication became his most effective tool of control. My pain was real and often immense, but I began to realize that he was keeping me in a state of perpetual, drowsy fog, not just to manage my pain, but to manage me. A sedated sister was a compliant sister. A sister who slept 12 hours a day was a sister who couldn't ask questions, who couldn't make phone calls, who couldn't fight back. He managed my prescriptions with the authority of a doctor, often giving me more than the prescribed dose. "The doctor said to give you an extra one if you're agitated, Sarah," he would lie, his voice full of a cloying, false sympathy. I was too weak and confused to argue, to even remember what the correct dosage was. I was adrift in a sea of painkillers and despair, and he was the one steering the ship. My life became a monotonous, gray landscape of waking, being fed, being medicated, and sleeping. The days bled into one another, indistinguishable from the nights. I began to lose track of time. My only calendar was the slow, agonizing progression of my own disease, the increasing stiffness in my joints, the gradual fading of the muscles I no longer used. I was being buried alive, slowly, methodically, in the silent, comfortable tomb of my own home. There were moments in the dead of night when a flicker of the old Sarah would surface. A wave of pure, white-hot rage would wash over me, and I would want to scream, to fight, to somehow claw my way out of this living grave. But the rage would always be extinguished by a crushing wave of helplessness. What could I do? I couldn't walk, I could barely use my hands. My own body was my most ruthless enemy, and it was in league with my brother. The spark, the first tiny, almost imperceptible act of rebellion, came from a place of deep memory. Before I was a weaver of grand tapestries, I was a girl who had learned to knit from my grandmother. It was a skill so deeply ingrained in my muscle memory that I wondered if my gnarled, arthritic hands could still perform the simple, repetitive motions. One day, while Michael was out, I undertook a monumental journey. I slowly, painfully worked my way out of bed and into my wheelchair. I wheeled myself down the hall to the linen closet, a place he never bothered to organize. In the back, on a high shelf, I knew there was an old knitting basket that had belonged to my mother. Getting it down was a Herculean task. I used a long-handled broom to slowly, painstakingly nudge the basket forward until it finally tumbled to the floor, its contents spilling out in a dusty, tangled mess. And there it was. A single smooth wooden knitting needle. The other one was missing. And a small, half-finished ball of old gray wool. It took me almost an hour to wheel myself back to my bed, the single needle and the ball of yarn clutched in my hand like a holy relic. That night, after Michael had given me my evening medication and the house was finally quiet, I began my secret work. My hands were stiff, clumsy claws. The pain was immense. At first, I couldn't even manage to cast on a single stitch. The needle would slip, the yarn would fall. But I persisted. Night after night, I practiced, my movements slow and agonizing. I was not knitting a scarf or a blanket, I was knitting a lifeline. I was teaching my hands to be mine again. I was proving to myself that even in this broken, pain-racked body, there was still a part of me that could create, a part of me that had not been conquered. After a month of secret, nightly practice, I had created a small, lumpy, and misshapen square of gray keel. Knitting, perhaps 6 inches wide, it was the ugliest thing I had ever made. And it was the most beautiful. It was a testament to my survival. It was a secret, a small, ugly, powerful secret in a world of beautiful, suffocating lies. I hid it under my mattress, a private symbol of my defiance. I did not yet have a plan. I did not yet have a hope of escape. But I had this. I had the knowledge that my hands, the very tools of my art and my identity, were not completely lost to me. I had reclaimed a single fragile thread of myself from the tangled mess of my life. And I knew, with a certainty that was as quiet and as strong as the yarn in my hands, that a single thread, if you are patient enough, can be the beginning of a whole new tapestry. My small, ugly square of gray knitting was a secret declaration of war. It was a tangible piece of evidence that the woman my brother thought he had successfully buried was still alive, still fighting, still creating in the dark. For months, it was my only comfort. I would work on it late at night, after Michael had stumbled off to bed in a drunken or medicated haze, my gnarled fingers slowly, painfully looping the rough wool. The piece grew, inch by agonizing inch. It was not a beautiful object, but it was a testament to my own stubborn resilience. It was the one thing in my life that was entirely mine. I had no plan, no vision of escape. I was simply knitting in the dark, a quiet, repetitive act of faith that I was still here, that Sarah the artist still existed. The first thread of a real, tangible hope arrived not as a dramatic revelation, but in the quiet, professional form of a new home healthcare aide. My brother's neglect, while psychologically devastating for me, had also made him lazy. The daily, difficult tasks of caring for a severely disabled person, the bathing, the physical therapy exercises, the careful monitoring, were a chore he had grown to despise. After a particularly bad bout of my illness, my doctor insisted that I receive professional in-home care at least 3 times a week, a service my own insurance would cover. Michael, seeing a chance to offload his most unpleasant duties and free up more of his time for his leisurely pursuits, reluctantly agreed. He assumed the aide would be just another person he could easily manipulate, another witness to his performance as the long-suffering caregiver. He had no idea he was about to let an auditor into his corrupt little kingdom. Her name was Maria. She was a woman in her late 40s, a no-nonsense, fiercely intelligent nurse with kind eyes and a spine made of pure steel. From the moment she walked into my house, I sensed that she was different. She didn't just see a sick, disabled patient, she saw a person. And more importantly, she was an expert observer. Her first week, she was quiet, professional, going about her duties with a calm efficiency. But I saw her taking everything in. She noticed the fine layer of dust on the beautiful furniture that was just beyond my reach. She noticed the lack of fresh, healthy food in the refrigerator despite the generous grocery budget Michael claimed. She noticed the way I flinched when my brother entered the room, the way he spoke to me with that cloying, condescending tone. Maria was a collector of details, and the details in our house were not adding up to the pretty story Michael was telling. Our alliance began with a book. One afternoon, while helping me with my range of motion exercises, Maria noticed my small hidden collection of art books, the few that Michael hadn't yet sold off. "You're a weaver," she said, not as a question, but as a statement as she looked at a picture of one of my old tapestries in a catalog. "Your work is magnificent." Tears welled in my eyes. It was the first time in years anyone had acknowledged the artist I had been. It was a crack in the dam of my silence, and a small trickle of the truth began to seep out. I told her in a quiet, halting voice about my old loom, about my studio. "What happened to your loom?" she asked gently. He said it was best to sell it," I whispered. "He said it was just a painful reminder of a life I couldn't have anymore." I watched Maria's eyes, and I saw not pity, but a flicker of a hard, calculating anger. She knew a lie when she heard one. Maria became my secret confidant, my lifeline. She understood the terrible, delicate dance of my situation. She knew that a direct confrontation with Michael would be disastrous. He would simply fire her and find a more pliable aide. So we began our own quiet, covert operation. She became my eyes and ears, my connection to the world beyond my bedroom walls. She would bring me a real newspaper, not the one Michael curated for me. She would tell me about the world, about current events, about the simple, everyday things that I had been starved of. And most importantly, she began to help me fight back in small, strategic ways. She insisted on overseeing my medication, taking that power away from Michael. "It's hospital policy," she would tell him, her voice firm and professional. "A licensed nurse must be the one to administer all scheduled narcotics." He fumed, but he could not argue with the wall of her professionalism. For the first time, my mind began to clear from the perpetual fog of over-medication. A question for all of you who are listening. Have you ever had a moment where a single compassionate person, a friend, a teacher, a stranger, saw your true situation and offered you a hand? Sometimes it only takes one person to believe you to give you the strength to start believing in yourself again. With a clearer mind, my own will to fight, which had been dormant for so long, began to reawaken. Maria and I began to formulate a plan. It was not a plan for justice, not yet. It was a plan for survival and for the gathering of proof. Maria knew my word alone, the word of a sick, confused woman, would be worthless against my charming, manipulative brother. We needed evidence. My first task was to reclaim a part of my own mind. Maria brought me a simple, spiral-bound notebook. "Write everything down, Sarah," she instructed. "Every time he sells something, every time he lies about the finances, every cruel thing he says, create a record. Your memory is your most important weapon. Let's make it bulletproof." And so I began to write. Late at night, my gnarled hand aching, I would secretly document the daily injustices of my life. The journal became my silent witness. Our first great act of espionage was to get a true picture of my financial situation. I knew my life's savings had been substantial, but I had no idea what Michael had done with it all. Maria came up with a plan. She told Michael that as part of my new care plan, I needed a full cognitive and memory assessment by a specialist. She made the appointment. The day of the appointment, she helped me dress and told Michael that she would be taking me herself. "It's better if he sees her alone," she told him. Your presence might make her anxious." On the way to the doctor's office, we made a detour. We went to my bank. Maria wheeled me inside. I hadn't been inside a bank in 5 years. I met with the bank manager, a woman I did not know. I presented my identification, and I asked for a full, detailed statement of all my accounts for the past 5 years. The document the manager printed out was a horror story written in numbers. It was a forensic accounting of my own fleecing. Michael had been systematically draining my accounts. There were thousands of dollars in ATM withdrawals from casinos in Atlantic City. There were charges for luxury hotels, for expensive restaurants, for designer clothes. He had been living a life of secret, sordid luxury on my money while telling me we couldn't afford a new television. He had plundered my life savings, leaving only a fraction of what had once been there. The most devastating discovery was what he had done to my home. He had taken out a massive second mortgage on the property, forging my signature. He had taken the equity I had spent a lifetime building and had converted it into cash, which he had then, according to the records, lost in a series of bad stock market bets. He was not just stealing from me, he was bankrupting me. He was destroying my home from the inside out. I sat in the car with Maria, the damning financial statements on my lap, and I felt not despair, but a cold, hard rage that was as pure and as cleansing as a forest fire. The last vestiges of love for the brother I had once known were burned away, leaving only the grim, unshakable resolve for justice. The time for quiet, passive suffering was over. The time for a real strategic war had begun. When we got home, my mind was a whirlwind of new, dangerous plans. The information was a weapon, and I was finally ready to learn how to use it. That night, I held the small, ugly piece of gray knitting in my hands. It had been a symbol of my survival. Now, it felt like something more. It felt like the first thread of a net I was going to use to catch the man who had tried to destroy me. The final confrontation was still a long way off, but for the first time, I could see a path, a tangible, strategic path to, a life beyond the four walls of my room. The game had changed. And my brother, in his arrogant blindness, had no idea that his helpless, invalid sister was now the one who was truly in control. The drive home from the bank was the quietest, most focused car ride of my life. I sat in the passenger seat, the stack of financial statements on my lap feeling heavier than a tombstone, and I was not the same woman who had left the house that morning. The fog of confusion, of guilt, of helpless victimhood had been burned away by the white-hot fire of the truth. I now had the proof. My brother was not just a neglectful, resentful caregiver, he was a methodical, calculating thief who had been systematically dismantling my life for his own sordid pleasures. The knowledge was horrifying, but it was also profoundly liberating. I was no longer just a sick woman being mistreated, I was the victim of a series of demonstrable crimes. And with that knowledge came a new and unfamiliar sensation, power. Maria, my fierce and loyal ally, understood the shift in me immediately. "So," she said, her eyes on the road, but her attention entirely on me. "What's the plan, Sarah? What's our next move?" For the first time, the question of a future did not fill me with dread, but with a cold, clear sense of purpose. "The plan," I said, my voice quiet but hard as steel, "is to get out. But not as a refugee, not as a victim running in the night. I'm going to walk out of that house with my head held high, with a new life already waiting for me, and I am going to make sure that he can never ever hurt anyone again." Our secret sessions, once focused on my physical therapy and emotional survival, now transformed into the strategic planning sessions of a two-woman special operations team. Maria was my general, and I was her spy master. Our first objective was to secure my freedom without alerting my captor. A direct confrontation was out of the question, Michael was volatile, and I was physically vulnerable. We had to architect my escape with the precision and secrecy of a prisoner digging a tunnel out of a high-security facility. The financial statements were our blueprint. With Maria's help, I began to meticulously document and organize the evidence of his fraud. We highlighted every suspicious withdrawal, every forged check, every charge from a casino or a resort. We were building a legal case, a powerful weapon that we would keep hidden until the time was right. The next and most crucial step was to create a new, secret financial identity for myself. On one of her days off, Maria took a trip to a neighboring state. There, using a new mailing address at a private mail service she had set up for me, she helped me open a new bank account under my own name, an account that Michael had no knowledge of and no access to. This was my war chest. Then came the delicate and dangerous task of diverting my remaining legitimate funds into it. I made a series of difficult phone calls, my heart pounding with the fear of discovery. I called my pension administrator. I called the Social Security office. Posing as a woman who was simply trying to organize her own affairs, I had my monthly income redirected to my new secret account. It was a slow, nerve-wracking process, but with each successful transfer, I felt another bar of my cage being sawed through. I was secretly cutting off his supply lines, starving his parasitic lifestyle at its source. While I was securing my financial future, I was also planning my physical escape. The internet, which Maria brought to me on her tablet, became my window to the world. We spent hours researching. I knew I couldn't just move into any apartment. I needed a place that was fully accessible, a place where I could be truly independent. We found a newly built assisted living community in a quiet, sunny city in Arizona. It was not a nursing home. It was a community of independent apartments designed for people with disabilities. It had wide doorways, roll-in showers, and accessible kitchens. It had a community garden, a swimming pool for physical therapy, and a vibrant community of residents. It was the exact opposite of the dark, isolated prison my brother had created for me. It was a place designed for life, not for a slow death. The cost was substantial, but with the funds I was now secretly controlling, it was a future I could actually afford. I filled out the application online, and 2 weeks later, I received an email. I had been accepted. I had a home waiting for me. A question for you, my friends. Have you ever had to make a secret plan to work towards a goal in the shadows because you knew that the people around you would try to stop you if they knew? It takes a special kind of courage to build a dream in the dark, and I would love to hear about a time you had to trust your own secret vision. As my escape plan solidified, I began a new secret therapy of my own. My hands, though gnarled and painful, had grown stronger from my nightly knitting sessions. I asked Maria to bring me supplies, not for knitting, but for my true art, weaving. She found a small, portable frame loom, the kind used for tapestry samples, and a collection of beautiful, brightly colored silk threads. At night, in the quiet of my room, after Michael was asleep, I began to weave again. It was a slow, agonizing process. My fingers were stiff and my movements were clumsy. But with each thread I passed through the warp, I felt a piece of my old self returning. I was no longer just a patient, a victim, a burden. I was a weaver. I was an artist. I was creating again. The small tapestry I worked on was an abstract design of brilliant, explosive color. Reds, oranges, golds. It was a picture of a sunrise, a testament to the new life I was weaving for myself, one thread at a time. It was my secret declaration of independence. The final phase of our plan was the most difficult. We had the evidence, I had the money, I had a new home waiting for me. Now we had to set the stage for the final confrontation. We needed to ensure that when I finally left, Michael would be held accountable for his crimes. Maria, through a friend who was a lawyer, helped me draft a formal, detailed legal complaint. It was a devastating document outlining the years of neglect, the psychological abuse, and the systematic financial fraud, all backed up by the bank statements and my secret journal. We made an appointment with the Adult Protective Services office in my county and with the Financial Crimes Unit of the local police department. The appointments were scheduled for the day after my planned departure. The last few weeks of living in that house were the most surreal of my life. I had to continue playing the part of T. He helpless, docile invalid, all while my mind was a whirlwind of logistics, legal strategy, and a terrifying, thrilling hope. I was a spy in the final days of my assignment, gathering my last pieces of intelligence, preparing to defect. Michael, completely oblivious, was becoming more and more agitated. His cash flow was drying up, my pension checks were no longer appearing in the joint account. He was growing desperate, which was making him careless and cruel. He raged about the incompetence of the pension office, never once suspecting that I, the confused, medicated woman in the next room, had outmaneuvered him. His desperation was the final confirmation that I was doing the right thing. He didn't love me, he loved my money. And now that the money was gone, he had no use for me. The night before my escape, I did one last thing. I finished my small, secret tapestry. It was far from perfect, my hands too stiff to create the flawless lines of my old work. But it was vibrant and it was alive. I left it on my pillow, a final silent message. It was a statement that the artist he had tried to bury had survived. The next morning, Maria arrived, not in her nurse's uniform, but in her street clothes, a grim, determined look on her face. Her car was waiting. Michael was out for his usual late-morning coffee. The timing was perfect. For the last time, Maria helped me into my wheelchair. We packed a single small suitcase with my journal, my legal documents, my weaving supplies, and the few personal treasures he hadn't sold. As she wheeled me down the hallway, I passed my old studio, the room he had turned into his personal den. The ghost of the weaver I had once been was finally, officially leaving the building. The journey to freedom was quiet, uneventful. Maria drove me to the airport, a place I hadn't seen in years. She had booked me a first-class ticket, a final fitting act of defiance paid for with my own reclaimed money. We sat at the gate, 2 women, 2 friends who had fought a quiet war together and won. When my flight was called, we hugged, a long, tearful embrace. "You did it, Sarah," she whispered. "You're free." As I wheeled myself down the jet bridge, a woman on my way to a new life in the sun, I felt a profound sense of peace. The hardest part was over, the restoration was about to begin, but I knew with a certainty that was as strong and as taut as a weaver's thread that the final pattern was not yet complete. The thread of justice for my brother, Michael, had yet to be woven. The flight to Arizona was a journey across a continent, but for me, it was a journey across universes. As the plane lifted off the runway, I felt the physical, tangible weight of my old life falling away beneath me. I looked down at the sprawling city, at the endless grid of houses and streets, and I knew that in one of those houses, my brother was just now discovering the empty room, the silent house, the beginning of his own personal reckoning. The profound sense of release, of a cage door swinging open after a lifetime of confinement, was so powerful it was dizzying. I was a weaver whose threads had been cut, and for the first time I was free to choose my own colors, my own materials, my own design. The future was a vast, terrifying, and beautiful blank canvas, and my hands, though gnarled and aching, were finally my own to command. My new life in the sun-drenched landscape of Arizona was a slow and patient process of restoration. The independent living community I had chosen was a revelation. It was a place built not on the presumption of helplessness, but on the principle of empowerment. My small apartment was a masterpiece of accessible design, a space where I could navigate and control my own environment for the first time in years. The simple daily acts of making my own breakfast, of wheeling myself down to the community garden, of checking my own mail. These were not chores, they were declarations of independence, small, sacred rituals of a life reclaimed. I had a community of neighbors who understood the daily struggles and triumphs of living with a disability. We were a fellowship of survivors, a group of people who had refused to be defined by our physical limitations. For the first time since my illness began, I was not the sick one in the room. I was just Sarah. The day after I arrived, as planned, Maria set our legal gambit in motion. She filed my detailed complaint with Adult Protective Services and delivered our meticulously organized file of evidence to the Financial Crimes Unit of the Police Department. The wheels of justice, I have learned, turn excruciatingly slowly, but they do turn. The investigation into my brother Michael began. I was insulated from the immediate fallout, protected by the distance I had created. Maria would give me updates over the phone. Michael, when first confronted, had apparently tried to play the part of the distraught, abandoned brother whose confused, ungrateful sister had run away. But his performance crumbled in the face of the overwhelming evidence. The forged checks, the casino withdrawals, the second mortgage, the testimony of the bank manager, the pattern of his deception was undeniable. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of financial, elder abuse, fraud, and theft. The legal battle was long and ugly. He used what was left of my money to hire a slick lawyer who tried to paint me as a mentally unstable, vindictive woman. But the evidence was too strong, the paper trail too clear. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 10 years in state prison. The house, my beautiful home that he had mortgaged to the hilt, was sold to pay off the enormous debts he had accrued. My inheritance, the fruit of my life's work, was gone, vanished into the black hole of his greed and addictions. But I felt no sense of loss. He had taken my money, but I had taken back my life, and I knew, with a certainty that was as solid as a weaver's knot, that I had gotten the better end of the deal. My own restoration was a quieter, more personal process. The warm, dry air of Arizona was a balm for my aching joints. I spent my days in the community's therapeutic swimming pool, the buoyancy of the water, a blessed relief, slowly, patiently, working to regain the strength and mobility that had been lost to years of neglect. And I began to weave again, not as a secret act of defiance in the dark, but as a joyful public act of creation. My small, adapted loom was set up in the sunniest corner of my apartment. My hands, still stiff and pained, slowly but surely remembered their old familiar rhythm. The brilliant, complex patterns that had lived only in my mind for so long began to take shape, one thread at a time. My art was no longer a memory of a life I had lost, it was the blueprint for the life I was building. A question for you, my dear friends, do you believe in karma, or do you believe that we create our own justice in this world? It is a question I have pondered for many years, sitting at my loom, watching the patterns of my life take shape. I found a new purpose. My own harrowing journey through the labyrinth of financial abuse and institutional neglect had given me a unique and powerful education. I began volunteering at my community's advocacy center, at first just answering phones, but soon my own experiences became a valuable resource. I knew the excuses, the manipulations, the ways in which the system could fail the most vulnerable. I helped other residents navigate their own battles with insurance companies, with neglectful family members, with a world that was not built for them. I became a fighter, a warrior, armed not with a sword, but with a deep, empathetic understanding and an unshakable knowledge of the law. This work became my new art form, the most important tapestry I would ever create. The years passed, as they do, each one a thread woven into the fabric of a life. I lived a quiet, purposeful, and profoundly peaceful existence. I had my friends, my garden, my advocacy work, and my weaving. I was no longer defined by my illness or by my brother's betrayal. I was defined by the life I had created, a life of strength, of service, and of quiet, resilient beauty. Then, about a year ago, I received a letter. It was from the chaplain of the state prison where Michael had served his time. He had been released after serving his full sentence. He was now an old man, in his early 70s, his health broken by years of hard living and prison life. He had no money, no home, and nowhere to go. The chaplain was writing to me, his only living relative, to ask if I would consider helping him. The letter was a ghost, a thread from a dark, ugly part of the pattern I thought I had finished long ago. My first instinct was to burn it, to say no, to declare that he had made his bed and now he must lie in it. The anger I felt was an old familiar echo. I spent a week with that letter, with that question. Did I owe him? What does anyone owe their tormentor? He had stolen my money, my health, my home, a decade of my life. He had left me to rot. By every conceivable law of reciprocity, I owed him nothing. But as I sat at my loom, my hands moving through the familiar meditative rhythm of the threads, I thought about the pattern of my own life. It was a story of a great and terrible darkness, but it was also a story of a profound and unexpected grace, the grace of a kind nurse, of a compassionate doctor, of a new community that had welcomed me. My life had been restored not by vengeance, but by care. And so I made my final choice. I, the woman who had once been his victim, would not now become his tormentor. But neither would I become his caregiver again. I would not allow him back into my life, back into my home. That door was closed forever. Instead, I made a series of phone calls. I spoke to the prison chaplain. I spoke to a social worker. I used my own money, the money I now earned from selling my beautiful, vibrant new tapestries, and I made a set of arrangements. I paid for a room for him in a clean, simple, supervised boarding house for elderly men. I set up a small, fixed monthly stipend to be delivered to him, enough for food and basic necessities, but not enough for luxuries or vice. And I included one non-negotiable condition: he was never ever to attempt to contact me again. It was not an act of forgiveness, it was an act of finality, it was an act of detached, responsible, and compassionate care, the very thing he had never been able to give me. It was the last complex stitch in our shared tragic story. My victory was not in seeing him punished, it was in my own ability to choose grace over bitterness, to choose to build rather than to destroy. And so, my dear friends, that is my story. The final pattern is a complex one, full of dark threads and bright, vibrant colors of pain and of peace. It is the story of a woman who was a prisoner in her own body, who was betrayed by the one person she should have been able to trust, and who found a way, one thread at a time, to weave a new and beautiful life for herself. If this story of survival, justice, and the quiet, resilient power of the human spirit has spoken to you, I would be so deeply honored if you would subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it. There are so many silent stories in the world that need a voice. If Sarah's journey to find a complex and compassionate form of justice resonated with you, I invite you to explore our playlist on stories about surviving and thriving after life-changing events, which is linked in the description below. In the comments, please leave the word justice to let me know you have followed this pattern to its final completed thread. Always remember, it is the strength of the threads and the patience of the weaver that determines the beauty of the final cloth. Thank you for listening.